Good evening. My name is Diane Soden-Groves, and my perspective on divorce is based on the last 20 years of co-parenting that I have done with my ex-husband as a divorced person. And that is the information that I will bring to you this evening, coupled with some of what the experts are saying, but that is my perspective. One of the biggest things that is important for us to realize is that we are modeling behavior for our children. How we do things right now, how we treat each other, how we respond to this situation, we are modeling behavior. Well, what are some of the things that we're modeling for our children? We are modeling how do we deal with a difficult situation. We are modeling how do you learn to treat someone respectfully that you've been involved with and maybe are going on a parting of our ways. And yet, how do you show that you still are parenting, that you still are co-parenting, and that you are still both going to be involved in your child's life? These are some of the things that we would be modeling and that we would be showing to our children right now. I divide this program basically up into two parts initially. There's the adult's experience of divorce, there's the child's experience of divorce. If there's 15 people in this room, we have 15 different experiences. And so I'm not necessarily saying this is what every adult's experience is. This is what some people's experience may be. How you deal with this and how you are dealing with your divorce is going to be very individual and going to be very different. For someone, it's a time for second chances. Second chance at life, at love, at happiness, at sanity. I don't know what it is. Someone wants out. You both may want out. Someone may say, no, I'm totally against this, which puts you on a different page then as far as how you are responding to this divorce, maybe how you're responding to this process and how you're working your way through this process. Someone once told me, especially if the divorce is not your idea and you don't want it anyhow, how difficult and how traumatic it would be in the sense of there you are driving down the road, you're in your car, 55 because you are, of course, following the speed limit, 55 miles an hour, and your partner who's sitting in the seat next to you grabs the wheel and just jerks it. Now all of a sudden, you're in the ditch going 55 miles an hour heading for a tree. So that's how their view of what this divorce was for them. So it is a time for second chances, and it can be a time where this isn't even anything you wanted. This isn't even anything that was something you were looking to do. So you may have to get yourself on that other page, even though you don't really even want to be there. One of the things that happens, and you may not even be aware of it, is that when you are parenting during this time, your ability to parent or your capacity to parent is actually being diminished and limited. And so what you're thinking is that you've got all these things going on, and there's things that are happening to you as an adult, and you're not necessarily seeing or realizing that this is the time when your children need you the most. And so whatever you can do to make yourself available and whatever you can do to make yourself strong and helpful to them can be very, very important. And again, it's your choice. Am I going to make this easier for my child, or am I going to make this harder for my child? How are they going to survive this? Okay, before I go any further, there was a disclaimer I usually say at the very beginning, and I would like to just say this at this time. Most of the assumptions that we have made, that the experts are making, that that we're talking about when we say things like children need contact with both of their parents, all of those assumptions are based on the fact that we're dealing with two relatively normal parents here. If you are dealing with someone who is dangerous, who is involved with drugs, who is deeply involved with alcohol to the sense where their behavior would physically put your children's lives at risk, who have either diagnosed or non-diagnosed mental illnesses, this puts you in a different playing field. And in actuality, you may not be able to do the things that people are suggesting, them having contact with this individual. You may require supervised visitation. You may require a totally different scenario. And if that's the case, then you need to be aware of that. I think the ultimate thought is whether or not your child's health or their safety could be at risk. And you never want that to happen. You never want to put them in danger in any way. I think the realization of how differently divorce affects the adults compared to children was brought home real clearly to me probably about 8 years into my own divorce. My children were 2 and 4 when we got divorced, and my son was 2 years old at the time. He was about 10 years old when he was talking. We were riding in the car, and this was one of those conversations I'll never forget. You know, they talk to you and they say, you just really want to be a good listener to your kids, and you want to have open lines of communication. And all of that is very true. Let me also tell you that sometimes you may hear things you don't really necessarily want to hear. And that comes with the territory, you know, the up and down, the good and the bad sometimes. This was one of those times. But it also was very clear to me then how I had a handle on our divorce, and I had the system figured out, and how different it was for my child. 8 years down the road, you know, we've got a handle, we've got a system, you know, the exchanges, all of that's working really well. The kids know where they're going to be, and you know, we're getting this stuff, we're working these things out. My son turns to me and he says, you know, Mom, sometimes when I'm with Dad and I'm having a really, really good time, I feel sad. And you know, in my head, that made like no sense whatsoever. But I figure it doesn't help communication if you go, duh, what's wrong with you? So I refrained from doing that. And I did turn to him and I just kind of said, you know, what do you mean? Tell me more. Because it was confusing to me. And then what he said made perfect sense from his perspective. You know, when I'm with Dad and I'm having a really, really good time, I miss you and I wish you were there. And so I feel sad. And, you know, I mean, it was one of those really changing moments when it just was so brought clearly to me that my world is not his world. And what I had done affected his world, but how he responded was so different than what I was going through. And, you know, we talked about other things, but I guess mostly too to realize that sometimes, you know, communication's great, it's wonderful, but you might not necessarily hear things you want to hear. And just to keep going though, and to keep listening, because you will hear things you need to hear, and it might not necessarily be what you want to hear. Why is our ability to parent lessened? Well, part of it is because divorce itself is a very stressful process. It can be stressful for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is because there can be many losses that are occurring at this time. One of which could be social losses. And you know, you were a couple and now you no longer are. You were part of a unit that no longer exists. Maybe you have friends that you wind up losing because you're no longer a part of that. And so there's some losses that can occur there. There are emotional losses and certainly intimacy losses. And subsequently can also happen would be financial losses. If you're looking at the income that was used to subsidize or to have one family unit, now all of a sudden you've divided this up into two. You may or may not have more income coming in. Eventually it will probably happen, but at some point there can be some real stresses for the financial losses that can occur. One thing to think about is that divorce, although there will be a specific date out there somewhere on some court document that will be stamped, that some judge will sign. So there will be a date out there, but it's not really just a one-time thing. Divorce is actually a process, and it just doesn't necessarily start and stop at one point in time. It can continue on. Some of the stages that can happen in the divorce is the first one, they call it the immediate crisis phase. And it may actually feel like that. It may feel like there is a crisis that led up to this process in your life. And that can last anywhere from 2 to 6 to 12 months. I always thought this was extremely ironic that the old adage was, don't ever make any major decisions if you're extremely distraught or upset. And yet, here you are, possibly in that immediate crisis stage, asked to make some very important decisions. You know, how is time going to be shared for our children? Where are they going to continue on with their schooling? What is going to happen here? These are major important decisions that you have to make, and yet you may not be at your best to make these decisions. So that's just something to consider and to think about. Then there can be up to 2 years, which could be like the short-term aftermath. You're making decisions. You're finding where you're going to live. You're figuring out, Are you going to have job changes? Are you going to be relocating? Are you going to be relocating your children in different school situations? You know, it can take a long time to settle in, kind of for the dust to settle, for you to figure out and to get a pattern that's working. And I may make a suggestion that you may want to revisit some of these decisions that you've made. If you've decided to have children every other weekend or every weekend with midweek visits, you know, just to kind of look at that and see, how is this working? And as children get older, they may have different needs. What might be difficult for a 2-year-old to live with could be very different for a 6-year-old or for a 12-year-old. So to be open and flexible to the idea of change, and change for your children, and what you can do, and this has been, you know, within, how can I say this correctly? You can change and you can modify your any of the decisions that you've made if you both agree on it. You know, you don't have to necessarily get court approval. You're the ones raising your children. Now, it makes sense, you know, you may want to get a signature or write up something. But if you as the two parents, for example, my ex and I changed, my work schedule changed dramatically when I went from a teaching job to a rotating shift position. And we just came to an agreement of the children would be spending time back and forth. Child support would be changed. We agreed on it, and we did that for the next 13 years. And we didn't have to go back to court for that. If you do make some changes, you may want to get signatures, may want to get things in writing for both of you, just in case other things change around. And then there's a long-range period. The reality is, y'all are going to be co-parenting forever. You're going to be co-grandparenting. You're going to be going to weddings. You're going to be going to graduation ceremonies. And you're going to be in the business of raising your children for the rest of their lives and for the rest of your lives. Unless this person, your former spouse, actually leaves the country or leaves the area, you will be on the periphery, or as much as you are, involved with them and with their lives and in your children's lives. The less conflict you bring into it, the more you can cooperate with each other, the more you can set aside whatever it was that, you know, the reality is, no longer you are in that relationship, that marital relationship, but you still are parents, and you still will always be parents. And so however you can work it out, however you can make it work to where you can function, it's the best thing that you can do for your children. And no matter, you know, our kids just need to have that relationship with both parents. They need to know that they have both of those parents in their lives, because that's so very, very important for them. It gives them a sense of security, and it gives them a sense of knowing where they are and where they're coming from then. One situation that I remembered very clear was this, about an 8-year-old little boy who was talking about and was very concerned that his parents would sit by each other or close to each other at a basketball game. And I, you know, at first I thought that was kind of odd. And then the more I thought about it, I thought back onto when I was a child and I was having a program or my son's basketball games. And what happens at the end of that? What do? Well, you send the children off. You know, you loose the children and they go to their parents. And for this young boy, it made very much sense for him. Think about it. You're 8 years old, little Johnny, mom's sitting over here, dad's sitting over here. What happens? Well, let's see. Johnny has to choose now. Really, who do I get to hurt tonight? You know, if I go over and sit with mom, or if I make that movement in this direction, then this person is going to feel left out, and vice versa. So for him, even if they could be in the same area, even if one was behind the other, or if they came up with a plan, we will meet you someplace else. It's those kind of things that as adults we are not necessarily aware of how our behavior is affecting our children. And that was very important for this young boy, was that he didn't have to be the responsible one. He didn't have to make his parents choose. He had the opportunity, you know, to just be himself, to come off of the game, to come off the floor and be done. Let his parents deal with those kind of things. And that's what I feel like our job is as parents. Our job is to minimize that, is to make it easier for our kids, not harder for our kids, to work their way and do what they need to be doing basically their jobs. Whether you're 2 years old and you're learning how to separate from your primary caregiver, whether that's your mom or your dad or that figure, or you're 18 or 17 and your job is to separate from the family unit and be an autonomous individual with your own values and your own views. What we can do as parents is to help our children do their job without any of the unnecessary things around them that could be involved in a divorce. Sometimes there is actually needing to be a period of grieving. This is a loss and is maybe felt very strongly that way and totally that way. And so when we need to, if you've never grieved before, if we've never felt a sense of loss before, we might not know how to do that. And they talk about a grief cycle. And in that grief cycle, there's some stages of grief. And there are some feelings that you may be having that you might be going through. And the first one could be anger. And then you might be doing some bargaining. And then depression or sadness. And eventually, when you work your way all the way through it, you get to acceptance. And everybody goes through this process a little bit differently, and this cycle doesn't always occur at the exact same pace or the exact same time. But it can be a very difficult time if you don't know what's going on in your life. So all of these things together is what makes it a little bit harder to parent sometimes, and why it's that ability to parent can be minimized, and how we may need to do different things to help ourselves so that we can be the best parent that we can be. Again, remembering, kids need me the most, I might have the least to offer. And so that whole balancing thing can be occurring at this point in time. Well, what are some suggestions for help? What are some things that we can do really to take care of ourselves to help us be better parents then? Because that same dilemma is occurring. I'm in my lowest state, my kids need me the most. Wow, how do I balance that? How do I make that happen and make that work? One thing is to take advantage of support groups that could be available. I have found whether it's a significant illness in the family, whether it's something traumatic that has occurred or something that has happened in someone's life, one of the things that occurs is that it tends to make you feel isolated or alone, or the fact that I'm the only one that this is happening to. And when you can talk with other people who have shared these experiences, who are some similar things are happening to them that have happened to you, then it just gives you more of a sense of being a part of other people's lives, and also just to be able to walk this through a little bit easier. So if there can be support groups available through the school system, through communities, through churches, and if you can, sometimes that helps people to be able to, even if you sit and you don't talk a lot, to be able to hear other stories and to be able to identify with other individuals when this is occurring then. I also had what I used to call toxic waste friends. Not bad people. They just would take on the bad stuff, and what they would do for me would be to listen to those hard feelings or those angry feelings or those frustrating times that would be very inappropriate for my children, for me to be venting on my children. They just didn't need to hear that. And so I would call a friend, and they would just listen, and they would let me vent, they would let me dump on them, then it was gone. And so I didn't have to hold on to those feelings, I could get rid of them. I also had what I called a divorce mentor. It was a friend of mine who had been divorced about a year ahead of me. And she would, she just kind of cleared the path for me. And I admired how she handled her divorce. I admired how she handled her children and a relationship with her ex-husband, and just how she was dealing with her life. And I would just use her as a sounding board then too, and just kind of follow her. It was someone who was on the same path as I was on, but just a little bit down the road for me. And I could learn from her and learn how to do the things I wanted to do. There's not only are there books, but there are books available in the bookstores and in the public library. You can check some of these books out if you find them in the library. There's some really wonderful books out there. I have Just a couple of examples here. Joint custody with the jerk. We can all be jerks at some point in time. This one here by Dr. Coulter is actually very good for parents and has some very specific ideas on how to help your child, and also what are some typical behaviors that children might be experiencing at different ages. And so you can really learn a lot from these. One is like Mom's House, Dad's House, Making Shared Custody Work. It has some really good ideas about almost like the business of raising a child. And I liked how she approached this, to just kind of pull back from the extreme emotions that can be happening at some point in time, and then just to deal with parenting and kind of take out of the equation some of the other views and emotions that can flavor it or color it. And also Dr. Judith Wallerstein's Second Chances. These are just some of the examples that I have found. They're in your pamphlet, in your folder. There is a book, a reading list. There's some of these books and some of the other examples that you can, maybe check out on your own and just get some other information. I just think a lot of sources can be really helpful sometimes when you're trying to learn how to do something and trying to work with something new. Well, if there aren't any questions on the adult's experience, I'm going to go on to the child's. And I guess this has always really been my biggest focus, because I guess I could probably say it in a simpler sentences. I want you to be aware of what you may be experiencing as an adult, but more importantly, what is it that I'm doing is affecting my child? How can I help my child? What might my child be experiencing? And what can I do to help them then, and to help them through this process, and how important that is. And that's how I perceive my job is as the parent. I know this first phrase can be very unsettling and shocking, but I think that's really an accurate portrayal of what is going on in our child's lives. It can be very devastating. They trust us as parents. They trust us to provide them with this uniform, safe home, and all of a sudden, this has changed. And they may have some really, really strong feelings. They may have some strong feelings of pain, sadness, anger, and I think it's essential, especially for children, to be able to experience those feelings and to be able to, even understand them. Some of the really young kids don't even know what those feelings are. They're just feeling them. And so then I think it's important for us as the adults to be able to identify those feelings, to feel safe around someone who is expressing those feelings, and then to help them work their way through them. And that may be very challenging for us as individuals. We may not be aware of our own feelings. We may not be aware of how to put a label on that, and then what will happen. And many times it's very uncomfortable to be around someone who's having some strong feelings. But however you can make it that you can work this out in yourself to be able to do that for your child, it will be beneficial for them. So it may be a big stretch, but I think it's very, very necessary. I know they used to say it was wise to stay together for the sake of children, but what they are discovering more so now is that the older children, teenagers, are having a harder time sometimes dealing with this. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because they have a long history of just what is family. What do we do at Christmas? What are our traditions? What do we do at birthday parties? Whether it's, you love your family, whether it's dysfunctional or not, and you normalize whatever it is that you live with. So one family unit, no matter how crazy making it may seem, that seems normal to you because that's what you're growing up with it. And if you have 15, 16 years of what your family unit is, and all of a sudden this is dramatically changed, it can be very, very difficult. And again, being able to listen to our kids, being a safe place for them to talk to us and to express their feelings, these are some things that we can be and that we can do for our children to help them through this process. Some of the younger children may actually blame themselves for the divorce. 4, 5, and 6-year-olds don't have a real strong grasp of reality. When I listened to my grandson talk about the dragon in his backyard, and he was seeing something for sure. And he was dead on certain there was some critter out there. And he was making it up. But at this age, these young children may have a real distorted sense of what is real, what isn't real, and also the feeling that the world revolves around them. So if they're all powerful, they could have caused the divorce. Of course, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand this or to feel this way if they are in front of parents who are yelling about them in front of them. If they're fighting about a child in front of a child, you would feel responsible as that child. I mean, that only makes sense. So it may not just be younger children. That's why we talk about, taking that away and not arguing about the children in front of children, because it can be very devastating for them. So if the world revolves around them and they're all powerful enough to cause the divorce, then they may be also powerful enough to get it back together again. So they may require being told, and more than once, besides I love you, that the divorce was not their fault. And they may also need to be told that no, mom and dad are not getting back together again. And that might just be, if that's the truth, and that's what they need to hear. It seems like no matter how bad the situation is, that most children don't want their parents to divorce. Older children have a longer sense of what family is, and so many times older children don't see that and don't want their parents to get divorced. I was kind of intrigued by, and I think part of it too is, even though if 50% of marriages wind up in divorce and 50% of second marriages also wind up in divorce, those numbers go down just slightly by the time you get to third marriages. I would think in most teenagers, school situation, a lot of their friends have parents who are divorced, but they still don't want to seem outside the norm. As a teenager, you want to just sort of fit in. And so there's a variety of reasons why they may not be excited about their parents getting a divorce. The big exception in most of the studies was seeing, though, was when there was domestic violence involved at any age. That is such a horrific environment that kids are more than strongly in favor of having that end, and so they would be a proponent of the divorce. Specific age groups. Some of the things, the problems that children may face, and some of the feelings they may face are kind of based on how old they are and what age group that they're in. One of which, the preschool years, could be the age of guilt. Now, think back again. If they're thinking this is their fault, then they're feeling guilty. So guilt and withdrawal of affection are two of the problems that cause young children some difficulty. And I think one of the biggest things and the very scariest things that can happen because of a divorce, and I don't think this is just necessarily for children of very young ages, I think anybody feels this way, is that if mom and dad could stop loving each other, pretty mysterious thing, could they stop loving me? And for a child, that's absolutely terrifying, to be unloved, to be out of that picture, and I think even for adults sometimes that could be kind of mysterious and kind of hard to figure out. Here's this person that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and now all of a sudden we're no longer together. I mean, you may be able to explain how it got from this point to that point, but it still might be a bit of a mystery, all the more so for your children. And specifically then, they may also have some strong feelings of just abandonment and rejection. It may be very hard for them to understand why someone's no longer living in the house, and that you're no longer married to that person. You're not divorcing your children. You're divorcing their parent. And so that there's that clear understanding that there's still that connectedness from parent to child, even though parent to parent, that is being changed and is no longer occurring. 6 to 8 years, if you think about this, these are, preschool or kindergartners, first, second grade. They have a very specific job that they're supposed to be doing in school. And if they are focusing on something else, if they're having problems if they're having problems at home, if their parents' divorce is being very disruptive in their life, they won't be able to do their job. I mean, this occurs at every age, but some of the important things that are going on in the early elementary years are crucial for the rest of their education. So it's really important that they can focus and they can do their work, and that we as parents then are doing what we can to help them do that. They call this sometimes the age of sadness. It's a very sad time. They're beginning to understanding understand what is family, what is our family structure. And they see this as a collapse of that structure, so they're sad and they can be very scared, and it's just hard for them sometimes. They may have some very strong feelings of anger or fear, betrayal, or a deep sense of loss, just deprivation. And so that can be a very difficult time for them. And they may need parents who can just listen to them and love them and reassure them that you're going to make it through, that I understand that you're sad, I understand that you're afraid, but we are going to do this, and we're going to make it through the situation. They may not be able to talk about their feelings. You know, they may do some acting out behavior. They may have some very different behavior than what they had been exhibiting, even like in the school, in their classroom situation. And this is where I will sometimes tell parents that if you feel comfortable with talking about this to their teachers, and just letting them know that there are some things that are going on at home, you know, and if the teacher can kind of keep in contact with you as to how are they doing, how are they adjusting. As a teacher, I found that to be very, you know, good information. It sometimes gave me an explanation why one of my students seemed kind of spacey or withdrawn or was behaving differently towards their fellow students than what they had been before. So that was just, you know, a good bit of information that I could use in my classroom then. They may have some really strong feelings of powerlessness and helplessness. And in actuality, that may make total sense. I mean, here's somebody whose world is being turned upside down, and maybe there's some radical changes that are being made. One thing, if you can help your child adjust as much as possible by keeping something the same, whether it's a daycare provider for some very young children, continuing on with Cub Scouts, playing baseball, soccer, some activity that they've done before that they're doing again. If you can try and keep them in the same school system, or if you're in the same neighborhood that has friends over, to keep some form of continuity in spite of all the changes that are going on in their life. So they are powerless and helpless to actually change their lives. It's being changed around them. Again, I'm not saying, you know, let them make all these decisions. It would be inappropriate for a 6-year-old or 8-year-old to make that decision. They may have some ideas about things, but you're the parents. You're the ones that are in charge, and so you need to do that job and to take care of them and to provide for them. If you've had a lot of conflict in a child's life, by the time they reach 9 to 12 years, and conflict, whether it's from the divorce or the separation, where it's one parent pulling a child against the other parent, I always envision this as two dogs fighting for a bone, and that child is that bone, you know, when you're in conflict. They will end up choosing. You know, a child can only handle that for so long. By the time they reach 9 to 12, for whatever reason, they choose. And in their mind, they have a good parent and they have a bad parent. And they really want to eliminate out of their lives that bad parent. When this happens, really everybody loses. The parent that has been labeled the bad parent loses in their ability to have a connection and to have a relationship with their child. Their child loses in the sense that they lose that role model in their life, and they lose that relationship. And whether they realize it or not, you need relationship with both of your parents. You know, I mean, you need that connection with your father figure and with the mother figure in your life. And so then to lose that can be very, very devastating. And quite frankly, as the custodial parent, I enjoyed it when my kids went with their dad. I mean, I had some time where I wasn't the total 24/7 single parent working and taking care of children, and I got to have a little time for me. So in a sense, really everybody loses, but the really, really big losers are the children, because this affects them for the rest of their lives. And not having that relationship makes it difficult to maintain relationship with other people sometimes. And so your children will be losing out then. The teenage years can sometimes be called like a false maturity. They're bigger, they have cars, they are, you know, spending so much time with their friends. They must be mature. But many times they really, you know, there's so many issues that are still going on in their life that they need you for. And they need your wisdom, they need your conversation, and they just need that connection with you. And so it's equally important for your teenagers to remain connected. It can be a real confusing time for teenagers. Their job is to break away from the family unit. Their job is to learn their identity, their values, and just their belief system and their thinking processes that are happening. And how are they independent, and how are they learning to live on their own? How can you break away from something that no longer exists? So for them, it can be a very confusing time, and it can be very difficult. It also may be very confusing for them to see, and this is one of my little soapboxes, I guess, that I get on. And hopefully it won't offend too many, but it can be very, very confusing at any age, but especially as teenagers, if their parents are immediately, even before the divorce is final, involved with somebody else. You know when you're in the beginning of a relationship, there's rosy-colored glasses, there's time wanting to be spent with this person, and it's wonderful, and you're focused, and it's just amazing, but it's at a time when your children really need you. They need you 100%. And it may involve just taking a little time out, giving yourself, everybody, a little space and time to adjust to this whole new world and whole new reality. And then you can go on and meet somebody else and bring them into that life, because there's only a finite amount of time in your day. And if you are, if you're meeting someone else and you're spending time with them, that is time, energy, love, relationship, whatever you want to call it, that is being taken away from your children. And they need you. And they need you in this time to adapt to this new event that's going on in their lives. And then there is time to have a relationship with somebody else further on down the road. Well, what are some other things? I know we've mentioned some up to this point, but what are some specific things that you can do to help your child cope with divorce? It's essential at any age to reassure them and not just say it, but to do it and to show it that you love your child. And that this is, recognizably a chaotic time in their life. This could be very difficult, but that you as their parent are there for them, and you love them, and you always will. And you're going to work your way through this, and you're going to survive this situation, and you're going to do it as a family. Some of those things in your child's life to try and keep them constant can be very important, and that will give them a sense of constancy. Again, if your child, you hear things like your child needs both parents, you can't control what that other person does. You can make it as easy as possible for everybody to have a relationship together. But if that other person does become distant, or if that other person, leaves the area or becomes a very non-involved parent, then you can help them find others that could help them out. And I don't mean necessarily go out and get a substitute parent. For example, my brother's ex-wife left the state and now lives down in Texas when her son was 3 years old, and he is now 11. Up to this time, there has not been his mother has not been in his life. What my brother did, and I really admired him for what he did this, is he intentionally tried to find situations in which there would be a female figure that would play a predominant role in my nephew's life. He did things like, initially when he was looking for daycare, he had a woman who did in-home daycare. And so it was a small setting, so my nephew had real one-on-one contact with this woman. He intentionally went and had a woman as his kindergarten teacher. And he kept the grandparents as involved as possible, and had other female family relatives to try to be as involved as possible in my nephew's life. So there are some things you can't change, but you can try and make as positive a situation out of it as possible. Again, looking at your child's life, looking at what is important and what is beneficial for them. I think it's a great thing is to help your child talk about painful feelings and to just be that safe place. I don't know if you've ever had it where you've had like a bad day or something goes on at work and you come home and, blah, 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 this happened. And somebody else, says to you, well, this is how you could fix it. And you go, no, and you tell this whole story all over again. And they go, well, yeah, this will make it okay. This is how you can fix it. And I think maybe somewhere on some level you eventually realize inside your head, I don't want you to fix it. I just want you to hear me. And that's where we can be for our children, is we can just be a safe place for them to be heard. And I think that's, that's a very positive thing that we can be for our children. Try to make sure that your child understands they're not responsible for the divorce. Kids tend to take this on. It feels personal. It feels personal when the parent that is no longer in the home becomes disconnected. And you're divorcing your former spouse. You're not divorcing your children. So it's real important to stay in touch and to stay in contact, although that's hard to do sometimes. And sometimes it's very painful to do. Sometimes when you see them only once a week instead of tucking them in at night, or 2 times a week, when you realize how much they're changing and how much their lives have gone on without you, it's easy to just kind of disengage and go, well, I'm not going to, I'm just going to do the easy thing. I mean, and you're not necessarily even thinking that, but you spend less and less time with them. Well, they take that very personally. And it's not about you, it is about them and how you can make their life better. You may need to clarify that the divorce is final. And this may be a challenge, but try to protect your child's positive feelings about both parents, because they do have positive feelings about both parents. They love you. They love you both. They're your child. They're from you. They're a part of you. At a certain point, you're their hero, and then as they're teenagers, you may become their embarrassment, but it's important, and both of you are to them. So try to protect that. Try to avoid custody fights. I know sometimes there's real necessary situations out there, but I really think with the time, the energy, and the money that's spent, it's more of a waste than anything else. And to try and just figure out really what is important. 10 years from now, what will matter? What is really, really important? And don't argue in front of your child. If you have to have a discussion, really go to Denny's, go far away. Don't do it on the phone in front of your child. Just keep them as uninvolved with the disagreements as possible, because they don't need that. It's like living in acid rain. It's not good for anything. You can't grow in that environment. I would just hope that you could walk away from this with, before I act and before I do anything that is affecting my child and this co-parenting relationship, to step back and say, what am I saying and doing right now, and how is this going to help my child make it through this situation? Not how am I going to win this point, and how right am I going to be, and how wrong am I going to prove this other person is, but how can we make it good for our child? How can we make this experience, how can we minimize the damage? How can we walk them through the rest of their life that they are going to be children with divorced parents? And how can we make this good for them, as good as possible? And how can we minimize the damage? Hostilities are over. Let's go from there, and let's do some really good parenting for our children.